What's going on, you guys? My name is Hartley, and in this video I'm going to show you the interview that I just did with Zahra, CEO of Drone Delivery Canada. Now, if you get any value out of this video, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I sincerely appreciate it. And if you want any more information on Drone Delivery Canada, check out their website, dronedeliverycanada.com. Without any further ado, here we go. Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. I really appreciate your time. And before we get started, I just want to apologize for a couple of my misstatements in one of my YouTube videos. I clearly misstated not only your cash position, but where you are testing some of your drones. So thank you for joining me. And I'd love to ask you a couple questions to clarify those topics, and then a couple more about your strategy and your perspective with Drone Delivery Canada.
My pleasure. Happy to talk and happy to tell the story.
Awesome. So first of all, I misstated your cash position and where you're testing some of the drones. So can you tell us, you raised some money over the summer. Can you give us a little bit of an insight towards your current cash position and how that looks over the next year or so?
Yeah, sure. So we haven't released our Q3 numbers yet. Those will be out in a few weeks. And so I can talk to what our cash was at the end of Q2, and then of course adding the $9 million raise on top of that. So if you look at what our cash was end of Q2, you add the raise that you mentioned on top of that, we have about $16 or so million in cash, which we expect to take us well into the year 2022. Yeah, so that's our cash position, and obviously the Q3 financials will be out in a little while, so people can see those. So yeah, I think we're in good shape. What we've published in the past is that our cash burn rate is lower than it has been, and given that we have 16 million, we feel comfortable to get us into 2022, we expect.
Cool. Yeah, I remember you had mentioned in one of your other interviews, you had sort of started to lower your research and development expenses and everything it costs to get set up. So I definitely wanted to dive into that a little bit more a little later on. And then the other topic that I probably mismentioned was where you are testing. So I know you're doing a couple of tests in Alberta, but you also are doing some tests in other locations other than Foremost. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, we've been around for 5 or 6 years, and the first few years we're really all testing and getting everything certified with the regulator. So we're well past that. But as new drones come out, like the Robin and the Condor, certainly you have to go through a test cycle with them. So we do have a 100-acre test range just north of the office, and there we test the smaller drones. So things like the Sparrow, which has been certified to fly, as you know, for years now, and the Robin XL. So we're currently testing the Robin XL at the test range here in Ontario, just north of the office. And then a few months ago, we did a little bit of a press release update on that. We did some testing of the Condor in Foremost, Alberta, which is in southern Alberta for people not familiar with the area. So we did a lot of testing there. Then we brought the Condor home, did some ground-based testing here, and then testing in Alma, Quebec. So in Alma, Quebec and in Foremost, Alberta, there are two very large test ranges. So you can imagine the size of the Condor, the range it's going to go and that sort of thing. We need a fairly large test range for that. So we did some work in Foremost, and now we're doing some testing in Alma, Quebec. So the things that we test, I mean, there's some ground-based testing first, which is the communication system, whether it's cellular or satellite or public or private radio frequency. So a lot of ground-based testing to start with, and then we do flight testing. So we could be testing things like the flight stability, of course. We could be testing things like the triple redundant navigation system, the triple redundant autopilot system. So a lot of different kinds of testing. So we use a variety of test ranges. We even test the Sparrow in the United States a few years ago as well. So we try to take advantage of all the different test ranges depending on the drone that we're testing, the size and the range and the kind of testing that we're going to be doing. And you've got terrible weather now in Alberta, so you got snow. So another reason we're not there right now.
Yeah, it's been a rough 2 days here, and it happens quick in Alberta. That's the part that sucks. Is I feel like in Ontario, you guys definitely get that nice fall season that lasts a little while, whereas in Calgary, it's a pretty dramatic switch. It feels like, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
So okay, thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. Now, I'm going to assume that the people watching this already understand what drone delivery is and some of the developments there. So my question for you is, right now you're delivering some very high valuable cargo to First Nations communities. What is the big business model a couple years from now? What's going to be the main revenue generator? Is it going to be those specialized deliveries to First Nations communities, or where do you see the largest chunk of your revenue coming from in 3 to 5 years' time?
Sure. It's hard to predict, that far out, but we break our revenue into three categories. There's commercial revenue, commercial customers, which I would consider those to be like the DSVs of the world, where they're a commercial enterprise, a for-profit enterprise, and they're typically logistics companies and those sort of things. And then there's what I would call public sector category as well, which would be government, healthcare, First Nations, and those kinds of customers. And then the third bucket that we have for our revenue categorization would be international. So any kind of projects outside of Canada, which we'll talk about later as well. So right now, I would say the public sector bucket would be the largest, because a lot of the applications we're doing are First Nations, and we put them into the public sector bucket, or they're healthcare related, or obviously the last few we've been doing with Beausoleil and Georgian Island are COVID-19, so they're healthcare and First Nations combined. So I would say right now the public sector bucket would be the largest one, but I would say the commercial one will see significant growth going forward, is what I expect, as we bring on some of the larger oil and gas and mining and logistics type customers. And then I think we'll see an acceleration on the international side as well. The international deals tend to be quite large and long term, so even a small number of those deals can really move the needle in that slice of the pie. So I think the allocation of the slices of the pie, if you will shift over time. Mostly public sector today, and then a growth in commercial, and then a growth in the international side. But I mean, I think people need to look at what our revenue streams are. Obviously, we're moving cargo, that's our primary business, but we don't necessarily care what the cargo is. So we can also move sensors, specialized cameras, and these sort of things, and then they're used for a variety of applications. They could be government, they could be military, they could be agriculture, they could be mining, they could be a variety of things. So we'll see a revenue stream from inspection services and photography, specialized camera and sensor type applications, not really recreational photography, obviously. And then down the road, going a few years out, we're collecting, I don't know if people realize this, we're collecting a lot of data from the drone spot itself, and then from the drone while it's flying. So that data, as we accumulate it over time, is going to have monetary value. It could be value to the government for environmental studies or what have you. So I think there's going to be more revenue streams coming on board, but today it's mostly cargo related. And then you'll see a shift where we add on other things like inspections and data services and some AI around the data in years to come as well. So I think there's a nice roadmap for incremental revenue as we go forward.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like it's going to be fairly diversified between hardware, software as a service, and maybe setup and integration and consulting. Is that the plan, or do you see it as one more than another?
So later we'll talk about Canada versus international. So in Canada, it's really a managed service. So it's like a device as a service or software as a service model. We're not really just selling the hardware. So we don't really just sell somebody a drone and walk away. It's really an integrated turnkey system. Sure, it's got hardware components like the drones and the battery management system and the drone spot depots and these sort of things, but it's really sold in Canada as a managed service. So it's really software as a service, device as a service type model in Canada.
Gotcha. So when you sit down on Sunday nights and you look at your entire business as a whole, what do you see as the biggest challenge for Drone Delivery Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a challenge necessarily. It's just the environment that we work in. I mean, it's a regulated environment. So, healthcare is regulated, pharmaceuticals regulated, aviation is regulated. So we work within a framework of a regulatory environment. So it may present some challenges because the technology typically in these kind of regulated industries, the technology is typically ahead of the regulation. So there's a lot of things we could do tomorrow. I could be hypothetically flying people around. I mean, the Condor will take 400 pounds. You can fit 1 or 2 people in that, but obviously the regulations don't allow for that. So I would say just working within the regulatory environment. Now, maybe that creates some limitations and short-term challenges, but the regulations are evolving. For instance, if you go back a year or so, we couldn't fly over roads. Now we're flying over the 401, the busiest road in the world. So the regulations are moving forward. We actually kind of like the fact that we're in a regulated environment, because we don't really want just anybody on the street flying a drone in a haphazard way, creating issues for us or airplanes or for airports. So the fact that we work in a regulated environment, we actually kind of welcome that, and we have a very, very strong collaborative relationship with Transport Canada, which is great for us. So you can see it as a challenge, but there's some benefits that go with it as well, I would say.
Totally, and especially once you get through those regulations, hopefully it's at that point a strategic advantage.
Yeah, and they are moving forward. I think talking to Transport Canada, they genuinely want the industry to move forward, and they are moving forward at their pace, which is fine, but it's definitely moving forward. So it's exciting to see what's going to come in the future for sure.
Nice. So when you when you look at the company as a whole, what do you see as the end goal or the kind of 10-year mission here? Is this a company that you're trying to grow as large as possible and be the dominant player in drone logistics? Is this a company that could be set up for an acquisition by a larger logistics company? How do you see that? Or is there a specific way that you're trying to manage and set up the business now for the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, startup companies go through a normal, life cycle. I mean, first we were a startup, many years ago. And then my mandate when I started with the company at the end of 2018 was really to commercialize the business. So we went from startup to commercialized. And then we signed an agreement with Air Canada. We started to sign customers and implement customers. And so we went operational. And now we're starting to generate revenue. So I would say, the position that we're at right now is really focusing on generating revenue. Profit will come as we have a regular cadence of projects and we sign some more customers and implement them, and then some international deals. But really the focus right now is growing the revenue. We're publicly traded, so an acquisition, anybody could hypothetically buy us, being a publicly traded company. But the focus really right now is signing customers, successfully implementing projects, and really driving revenue, which we started driving revenue, I guess it was in March of this year. Yeah.
Nice. And that's super exciting. And I've heard you mention that on a couple of your interviews now. And I'm really happy to see that, definitely as somebody that's looking at the company right now. Now, my question is, over the next few years, how do you find the balance between revenue and actual net profit or earnings for the company, or at least EBITDA? Is that sort of on the back burner and definitely something in your mind, or is that a priority as well as revenue? How do you see that as the company grows? Obviously, definitely not a priority right now, but is there a certain point, or how do you personally find that balance with your team?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the focus right now is on revenue, and profits got there's a couple of components to the profit equation, obviously revenue and expenses. So I think we're doing a good job managing expenses, and as I mentioned, the burn rate is lower than it has been in the past. And it's going to go up and down depending on R&D and projects and international endeavors and these sort of things. But the focus is really on being appropriate with our expenses and spending where we're going to see a good return. And then the other side of the equation, which is the revenue. So definitely the focus is very much on revenue. Not to say that we don't care about profit, we do, but the focus right now is on revenue. And we're just early in generating revenue. I think we've made a lot of accomplishments in the last 6, 12, 18 months in terms of commercializing, operational, signing customers, implementing customers, and then driving revenue. But I would say the focus is primarily on driving revenue, and at the same time managing expenses, of course.
Awesome. That makes sense. I like that. In the press release you guys put out on September 28th, it stated you guys are now working with Astral Aerial Solutions to identify and analyze market opportunities. Can you expand a little bit on that and the strategy behind this letter of intent and why it's a good fit for Drone Delivery Canada?
Sure. So Astral is a well-established, award-winning air cargo company in Kenya, but they certainly fly elsewhere in Africa and Europe. So the intent is to work with them to go through the regulatory process, which is normal. Obviously, we've started that in the U.S. as well. We mentioned a press release a little while ago. We've started that endeavor, and of course, we went through it in Canada quite a while ago. But as we go in the new markets, the first step is going to be working with the regulator, getting type approval for the drones, setting up with the partner so they can be the operator, and really moving forward. So it'll start with Kenya. They're well connected in other countries, so I can see them expand to other countries in Africa. Africa's got a population of, I think, 1.2 billion people, so it's a huge market. You got to start small. So we're starting in Kenya, which is a great country, very sophisticated from a business point of view, politically very stable, and it's a great partner. So we work with a partner outside of Canada to license them to become the operator. So a slightly different model than in Canada.
Okay.
But they're a great partner, and we're going through the regulatory process, and then we'll work with them to sign up customers, implement, and then there's a licensing agreement where they pay us licensing fee.
That sounds like a really nice business model. So they're basically taking the technology, the system, everything that you guys have developed, operating it, and paying a monthly or quarterly kind of reoccurring revenue.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so we still do the monitoring, and it's still a managed service, but they now become the operator. So they will go out and find customers, and they will implement projects, and we will sell them the hardware, and which is a little different than in Canada, and then they will pay us a licensing fee. So I mean, you could look at it, in Canada, the analogy you might use is in Canada, we're selling you the Big Mac combo, but outside of Canada, we're selling you the McDonald's franchise. So it's more of a, it's not exactly a franchise model, but it's more of a licensing opportunity. So the customer becomes the operator.
Okay, that's a big insight I wasn't aware of personally. So I like that business model. From a strategy perspective, you are now operating in Canada, the USA, and Kenya, or at least starting to get your feet wet in those areas with regards to regulations. What are the key factors that you look at when you're evaluating these different types of opportunities? So when you looked at Kenya or the US or wherever it is, or the next opportunity, what are you evaluating to decide yes or no?
Yeah, so so typically we're looking for somebody who has a few things. First of all, they've got some experience with the regulator. So either they're an airline, a big airline, or a small airline. Preferably they're in the logistics space, so they could be a courier company, they could be a freight forwarder, they could be 3PL. There could be somebody who's in the logistics space, or at least they understand understand the world that we're talking about. And then obviously it's going to be somebody who's a medium to fairly large company, so they've got the financial means to be able to be an operator, pay us a licensing fee, and these sort of things. So it's typically going to be a fairly large company that operates broadly within our space, has some kind of relationship already with the regulator and the government, and has the financial means to do what we want them to do.
Cool. Thank you for that. That was something I was looking at, especially from a strategy perspective. Now, you talked about Astral Aerial previously, and they have a drone that pretty much looks like a giant plane, more so a plane than a drone, and they call it the FlyOx. It has a massive capacity of 1,850 pounds and a range of 1,200 kilometers. Do you see any type of use case scenario for this in your business, or any type of larger drone than the Condor, or is the Condor probably the largest use case you would expect in a Canada, US environment?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll just add, before I answer that question, I'll just add something to the Astral. So I mean, obviously we announced that we've started the process to go in the US, and now we're working in Kenya with Astral. We are in discussions, as I've publicly said before, with a variety of countries, including Israel and India, and obviously Europe, and a few other large markets. So definitely we'll see more to come on the international front. So specifically to the FlyOx, I mean, I would say that our focus right now is on the Condor. I mean, for us and the industry, I think the Condor is going to be a game changer. There really isn't anybody out there with a viable solution that's at the Condor level. I mean, there are drones that are larger, and there are companies that are working on some massive drones, but some of them, the price point is $200 or $300 million for the drone. So You know, I'm not sure there's a business model for that today, but if you kind of look at the, you know, the segment for the, you know, heavy lift type drone like the Condor, I mean, definitely our focus is on the Condor today, but there will be bigger drones, there will be longer range drones, and there will be, you know, bigger payload drones in the future. It may or may not be may or may not be the Flyox. There are other companies who are different than us. They're not service providers. They're purely hardware manufacturers, and they want to make a drone and then sell it. So they could potentially be a supplier to us. We don't necessarily have to be developing and designing and manufacturing the drones ourselves. We're happy to work with third-party drones. So there definitely will be something bigger than the Condor in the future. I can't say it's going to be the Flyox necessarily, but there will be something big in the future. Now, one of the benefits that people might not realize of our system and our approach when, you know, the company was started many years ago is our focus wasn't on the drone. So if you look at people like, you know, Google Wing or Amazon or other companies, their focus is really on the drone. You know, they may have a system and some other things that go with it, but the focus is on the drone. Our focus was primarily on the system and the managed service model. So our system is what we call airframe agnostic. So I could put my system on somebody else's drone. I could put my system on somebody else's manned aircraft, whether it's fixed wing or a helicopter. So hypothetically, I could put my system on a Cessna 172, and now I've got a drone. I could put my system on a military Apache helicopter, and now it's part of our system. So that gives us a nice technology roadmap without us having to develop everything going forward. Because, you know, definitely the drones after the Condor will be, you know, pretty significant, and they won't necessarily, you know, come from us. They could come from people who specialize in purely designing and manufacturing hardware. So it's there will be something bigger, but, you know, hard to say what it is today. Our focus is really on bringing the Condor to market.
Yeah, and it makes that model makes your business a lot more scalable too, which is really nice.
Exactly.
Speaking of these drones in particular, we talked a little earlier about the weather in Calgary. It's about -10, -15 right now. Now, I've read the website. I've read most of the spec sheets on the drones that I could find. It says that they can fly in most weather conditions, or they're pretty robust. How robust are these drones in cold weather conditions? Are they going to be flying through a winter storm here in Calgary, or how do they compare to a plane taken off from the Calgary airport?
Sure, good question. So, I mean, we have done flights day, night, rain, and snow. You know, we're flying today, and it's raining here in Toronto. If you look at our YouTube videos back to, I guess it was September 2018, where we were flying at Moose Creek First Nation, it was snowing. It was windy and snowing. So we're a Canadian company. We know Canadian weather. So we're definitely designing the hardware for, you know, the Canadian environment. But then, you know, we're also talking to customers in the Middle East, you know, who could be, you know, operating at +50 degrees Celsius. So really the system can, you know, can accommodate the user's needs. Now, one of the ways to accommodate that is the fact that the drone spot could have a retractable roof. It could be heated, it could be air conditioning, depending on the environment we're working in. So really we have the ability to accommodate a variety of weather applications. I would say, you know, rain and snow are probably not the big issues. I would say, you know, more the limitation would be winds, which is, you know, similar for any kind of aircraft. But, you know, for us not to fly, it has to be, you know, pretty windy and probably nobody's flying anyway. So to answer your question, yeah, we can operate in a range of temperatures and climates and that sort of thing.
Cool. I was really curious about that. I had a DJI drone and it didn't really last very well in the winter. So I'm sure you know. Let's jump. I have a couple of questions. I saw a press release and I thought this was really interesting. You found a new CFO recently. What was the process like to find Mr. Aurora? How did you find him and why did you choose him to take on that?
Yeah, sure. So he was actually already corporate controller with the company for, you know, maybe around a year or maybe a little less. So, you know, we had some experience with him as corporate controller. And I don't know if people know, but, you know, in the past, it's not the case anymore, but in the past, you know, the CFO and finance function was outsourced, which is common for a small startup type company. And, you know, we're not a startup anymore. So we thought it was the right time to do a few things. First of all, to bring the CFO function in-house So we promoted Manish to the CFO function from the corporate controller function. And then we also brought in-house the finance and accounting system, which was previously outsourced. So now we implemented the Oracle NetSuite system, financial system, which went live this year in July. So we did a number of things. We brought it in-house, the CFO function in-house, and then we brought the financial system, all the processes and everything in-house. So now it's entirely in-house and not outsourced at all. So he was part of that process. But yeah, we had some experience with him as controller, and then we were very happy with his implementation of the system and all the things that he was doing. He's got great experience with publicly traded companies in the automotive sector as well as in the aerospace sector. So we thought he was a great fit, and it was a natural progression as the company as we grew to move to an in-house CFO role and bringing all the finance and accounting in-house as well.
Excellent. Awesome. Nice progression and growth of the company. Since you became the CEO of the company, what has been your largest personal challenge? Taking on that role and being the head of the ship, what has been the largest personal challenge for you coming into that position?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not just building the company. I mean, I would say, I would say from a breadth and depth and capability point of view, I would say we're the leader in the industry by far in Canada, but one could argue internationally as well. So we're not just building the company, which is an endeavor on its own to go from startup to commercialized, operational to revenue, but we're also building the industry. So we're working with international partners, we're working with the regulator in Canada. We do a lot of speaking and advising with other regulators. So I don't know if it's a challenge, but I mean it's a lot of work, you could say. It's enjoyable work. I mean, it's not too often in your life you get to help build an entire industry. But with that comes a fair bit of work and figuring out the business model, figuring out the regulatory environment. And in the past. Figuring out the technology. So there's been a lot of work done, and I don't know if people really appreciate, behind the scenes, what's been accomplished over the last, 12 or 18 months. But I would say just, remembering that we're not just building the business, being a leader, you're actually building the industry as well. So that's a pretty big mandate.
Yeah, and with such a new industry and regulations that you said are probably behind the technology, that sounds like quite the challenge.
Yeah.
What do you say to shareholders who are either happy or concerned about the stock price over the last 12 months, 18 months? Or do you completely avoid that situation? How do you handle that when shareholders or people bring that topic up to you?
Yeah, I mean, so as a publicly traded company, it's really, hard for us to, comment on past, present, or future predictions for the stock. But, I would say that, I would say there's been a lot of uncertainty, overall in the market in the last, whatever time frame you want to use, 6, 12, 18 months. We had a collapse in the cannabis market, and a lot of tech companies as well. Obviously the pandemic has created some turmoil in the stock market. We've got an election with our friends south of the border coming up, which creates a lot of turmoil in the stock market as well in Canada and the U.S. because obviously Canada's economy is tied very much to our friends in the U.S. So I mean, there's been a lot of, I would say, external factors that people need to consider. If you look at the aerospace industry in Canada, it's down about 35%. So I think there's a lot of things outside the control of the company that influence the stock, up, sideways, or down over the last, again, 12 or 18 months. I mean, I would say that we continue to put out good news. I think we're at an inflection point in the industry, which we're going to see, start to see dramatic growth in the industry. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a terrible thing. We wish it didn't happen, but one of the silver linings, if you will, from the pandemic is it's definitely raised the profile of the industry. We've seen a lot of use cases in Canada and internationally for drones. So that is, I would say, accelerated the profile of drone delivery globally, including in Canada. So I think we're at an inflection point where the industry will start to take off. No pun intended. It's kind of really hard to say because there's a lot of macro factors that are outside the control. I mean, I can say that we continue to put out good news, and the market will react according to that. But then there's also factors outside of our control that I mentioned that we don't have any influence over, obviously.
Yeah. And I mean, because you're publicly traded, you obviously also have a wide range of investors, from institutional investors and banks all the way down to retail investors sitting at home like me and the guys in the Facebook groups. Now, obviously, they're two different investors with two different objectives. Is there anything that you would like the retail investors to know? The guys like me and the guys in the Facebook group that are putting a couple $1,000s here and there into the stocks. Is there anything that we should know from your perspective as a CEO of a publicly traded company?
Yeah, I know it's a good question, and we appreciate all of our shareholders and investors, and their enthusiasm for what we're doing, and their support. I mean, we appreciate and respect all investors, from the very large institutional mutual funds who are holders, and I know retail investors who have $100 in the stock, and it doesn't mean they're any less important, because you add them all up and it's significant. So and we appreciate everybody. I guess a few things I would say. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation on maybe I'll start with the industry. There's a lot of misinformation on the industry in general. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors, if you will. There's a lot of, I'm not even sure I would call them competitors, but participants in the industry globally, who are putting out all kinds of press releases and YouTube videos, and they're claiming all kinds of wonderful things, and they're small pilot projects or those sort of things. So you really need to do the due diligence when you see a news story about somebody else in the industry who's doing something, Canada, US, or internationally, and really peel away the onion and determine, is this really a commercial project? Is this really just some small pilot that they're hyping up for attention? So I would say do your due diligence on the news you see in general, because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the industry itself. And then I would say I see a lot of misinformation on, and I don't spend a lot of time on the the Facebook group or the the stock boards and that sort of thing. I do look at them once in a while, just to kind of get a feel for what people are talking about, and the vibe and that sort of thing. And we appreciate everybody's support and encouragement, and a lot of kind words and comments that people make. But there's a lot of misinformation there. So I would just say, the source, the best source of the information is going to be what we publish. We publish on a quarterly basis, and when we do our filings for our financials, and there's something called an MD&A, which is a discussion of the financials that we publish with the financials on a quarterly basis, our press releases and these sort of things. So really, that's the best source of information, what we're saying. So there's all kinds of people on the stock boards who may have, maybe they're shorting the stock and they have other agendas, and they're going to bash it and say different things because they're shorting it. So you really got to do your due diligence on where you're getting the financial information and this sort of thing. So I would say that second, and then thirdly, again, we appreciate everybody's excitement, enthusiasm, when we implement projects and that sort of thing. We have had a few instances where I'm assuming they're investors and they're excited about our projects and what we're doing, but they sometimes go to the project, which can break some of the Transport Canada rules. It can interfere with our engineers who are doing implementations. In some cases, you're on private property, and we don't want to be upsetting our customers. Or sometimes people are taking rogue photos at a project that we're implementing them, and they're posting them on social media, and that's just feeding information to our competitors. So I mean, that's not really a good thing to do. So I would say, I understand, everybody's excited. We are too, and we're excited about publishing information about projects when they go live, and photos and videos and all that kind of good stuff. But I would say just kind of maybe step back and kind of wait for us to put out the information. That way, it's going to be accurate and correct, and we're not really interfering with a customer or going to upset a customer or that sort of thing. So that would be my only recommendation to retail investors. But yeah, we love you all. We appreciate your support. There's a lot of people who, when we post something on social media, saying all kinds of words of encouragement, and we really appreciate that. So it's a great family, I would say, the company and our shareholders.
Sweet. Michael, I think that's probably a perfect spot to end the interview there. Thank you so much for your insights and for spending some time with me. I sincerely appreciate it. And I know everybody else that watches this will as well. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem, Zach. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, you guys, so that's it for the interview. If you got any value out of that, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I sincerely appreciate it. I will also put links down below where you can find more information on Drone Delivery Canada, as well as a free stock market course in case you're interested in signing up. If you need anything else, send me an email, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.